Mr. Secretary, I appreciate that NIH wants to recalibrate its research portfolio to address conditions not previously attended to sufficiently. Nutrition, conditions such as arise after viral infection like myalgic encephalomyelitis or chronic fatigue syndrome. But this is happening in tandem with reports that HHS is closing the Office for Long COVID Research and Practice. And I talk to people for whom long COVID is seriously impacting their life. So to what extent will HHS continue to support research, data collection, and other programs focused on understanding ongoing health impacts of long COVID?
Senator, I am 100% committed to finding treatments for long COVID. I'm deeply involved in that personally. I have a son who is really dramatically affected by long COVID. I have many, many friends who are affected by that and by Lyme disease, incidentally, which we also is also a priority. The COVID office was cut by an executive order from the White House, but everybody at NIH and at CDC is committed to these kind of studies, and I can tell you personally, I will make sure that they happen.
Thank you. The NIH is the largest public funder of biomedical research in the world, giving us an edge over countries like China, with whom we are obviously a geopolitical rival. But it takes a long time to develop this. And the rising prevalence of neurodegenerative disease is one area in which we have an impending crisis if we don't support the research and advanced cures. And my concern, and now I'll speak as a guy from Louisiana, if NIH funding is substantially reduced, they have folks at my universities, at Tulane and LSU, who are doing work on these sorts of things. So knowing that the NIH budget is getting squeezed, and the indirect costs likewise, how will the NIH successfully do more with less? How will we build those new scientists to find these cures and to compete with geopolitical rivals?
Well, for one thing, Senator Cassidy, you're talking about neurodegenerative disease now?
For example, ALS or Alzheimer's.
ALS, right. The Chinese are not spending a lot of money on DEI, and we are cutting those studies. We're cutting studies on gain-of-function studies, and we're cutting grants to foreign scientists from adversarial countries, and particularly the Chinese, which have the 1,000 Talents program, which is openly trying to exploit U.S. research and take our IP. We spend more than any country in the world on biomedical research. NIH controls about 70% of the global funding for biomedical research. The cuts we have made to date are administrative cuts. As far as I know, we have not fired any working scientists. Of the working scientists, the people who are actually doing scientists, there are some people who are scientists that were doing IT or administration, in terms of who did lose their jobs. In terms of working scientists, our policy was to make sure none of them were lost and that research continues.
Thank you. Let me ask you, the budget proposes to eliminate several large block grants for hospital and health department emergency preparedness and other core public health capabilities, explaining that states are better equipped to fund these activities. Now, I agree that frontline public health happens at the local level, but what works well in, say, Louisiana may not work well in a state like New York. But rural, under-resourced states especially rely upon federal funding to support public health. How do you propose we balance competing interests, returning power to states, because there is a difference in how different states do it, but replace the funding necessary to combat these public health problems?
Well, I think it's a balance, Mr. Chairman, and we have a legal obligation. CDC has a legal obligation to do national pandemic response, and we will meet that obligation. And in fact, we are going to improve it, and particularly if we can get support from this body to refund, reappropriate the PAPA, which is critical for our pandemic response. But there are some functions that are local in nature, and in those cases, we will be supporting local infrastructure to respond. They know better than we know, and we saw this during some of the hurricane response with, Governor DeSantis' response, which was really Florida localized. There was no deaths and very little destruction to a hurricane that was as bad as the one that followed that relied on federal response and was really a catastrophe for the state. So I think experience shows that the localities can often do better with some functions, particularly with the hospitals and infrastructure. But we are not relinquishing our responsibility at CDC to manage national emergencies.
Thank you. Senator Sanders.